So welcome to another Nurses Outside the Box as we're listening to this with Antoinette actually today. And she has a phenomenal website, The Visionary Nurse, and a phenomenal journey. Antoinette, just share with us, what makes you so passionate about what you're doing right now, right? Because I would love to hear your story. What made you a nurse outside the box, and what made you do with the Visionary Nurse in particular? You want to share it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. And I appreciate you having me and just getting a chance to create this platform. I think it's so necessary, especially now, because I think nurses in general are in a very unique time and space in our profession, you know, this being the year of the nurse and midwife, and really trying to understand what that means, especially in the middle of our pandemic. And so I think more than ever, many nurses are asking themselves, what does it mean to be a nurse right now? Especially maybe for those nurses who don't work in the ICU or acute care, and say, you know, what does nursing mean? And I think for myself, I'm kind of telling a little bit of my journey. So I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner by trade in primary care. And so my focus has always been in wanting to work in vulnerable populations, especially with children, and finding ways to improve those spaces, not only in a traditional clinical sense, but also through health education and a community outreach. So nursing was my second degree. Education was my first. So everything I do is always this intertwine between health and education. I cannot separate the two for however much I try. It embodies who I am and what I do. And I think it's carried over into how I've defined what nursing means to me and what I do with nursing and my nursing outside of the box. So anyway, I kind of went towards my journey of nursing after getting my first degree in education, because I always had, again, this interest in health. And I ended up living in abroad in Central America, primarily in Guatemala, for about 3 years. And I worked with an organization called Primeros Pasos, which means first steps, as well as an organization called Somos Hermanos, which is we are brothers, throughout Central America, and thinking about how can you build cultural competency and public health outreach and really partner with the community to deliver health care and health interventions that are sustainable, and that it's not just here I am, you know, someone from outside of the country saying this is what you should do, but really saying, how can I partner and collaborate with you? I might have some resources that can help you, but I ultimately want to learn from you and implement and find ways to enhance what you need in your community. And so those were very intentional and formative times for me. And it was during that time that I had this epiphany that nursing is really what I wanted to do, but it was always with this lens of community health, because, you know, all these nurses were volunteering and coming into our clinic, and I saw them in action as the type of providers that I wanted to be, in the sense of the education piece, the partnering piece, the holistic piece, the health delivery piece. And I had, you know, really been searching a way to put all that together. And for me, I thought, you know, it was the traditional medicine route or going in as a pediatrician. But I recognized that nursing and a nurse practitioner really embodied all of those things of having, you know, the versatility that you needed, but also the clinical aspect. And so I dove in, went to the University of Pennsylvania to get my nursing degree, my bachelor's, and then my master's in pediatric primary care. And throughout my tenure at University of Pennsylvania, the main theme was dare to change the world. And global health was always my focus, and daring to look at nursing differently. And so even from there, it was always this kind of outside of the box thought process of how I wanted to apply it from then. While I was in nursing school, I got a chance to be a part of, it was actually kind of a cross-discipline event that was called Penvention Competition. And it was allowing other professions and disciplines to work with the engineering school and find ways to create inventions that would be ways to, you know, change whatever you wanted to change. And so I got a chance through this nursing school to be a part of the only nursing team wanting to start a business and wanting to implement, you know, this health education game that we did. And I should have known it at that point, that I always had this kind of evolving, but it was just, in my mind, I just thought, oh, it's just me wanting to see nursing being done in a different way. It's just me wanting to expand the way nursing is implemented. And I didn't realize it was so out of the box at the time of, you know, a nursing wanting to develop a board game or start a business. And it resonated with me and stayed with me. And, you know, as a lot of developing projects start, they don't always stick around, but it just stayed in the back of my mind of, how can I be a nurse in business, or how can I be a nurse that changes the community in the face of the community? And so it really shaped how I approached everything. Even in my clinical care, I always wanted to be the one who started a program or a project. I got a chance to start a dental varnish program and implement that within the hospital that I worked with in the primary care area. I worked in the community setting as a health educator and a nurse educator within it, and as well as, developing manuals for more effective community outreach with a clinical viewpoint. And so all of that I say to paint the picture of where I'm at right now, where after several years of recognizing that this is the vein that I was in, my husband, I bless him so much because he was so willing to kind of like dive in deep, And I said, I think it's time for us to relocate and move to rural South Carolina and start a community health initiative. And before, it's not totally left field, but we were in Philadelphia at the time, and my parents were in the rural South Carolina area, and they had constantly told us about just the many different hardships that were happening in rural America in terms of access to care. Specifically, South Carolina is not only in the Bible Belt, but also known as in the stroke belt. So a lot of issues with diabetes, high blood pressure, and then just a disconnect in terms of access of what the community needed. And so I didn't expect to have all the answers, but I thought this is really my kind of environment. I've always wanted to take this approach where I guess I see community as the patient. And if I can find ways to intervene the community as a whole, then maybe that would ultimately trickle down to how care is accessed, and even thinking about preventative care and all of that came with it. And at the time, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation had released this report of nurses as change agents. And that stuck with me. And I said, I can be a change agent. I've had all this community experience, all this public health experience, all this, primary care clinical experience. I feel like I need to merge these together and find another way. And so we kind of launched this grassroots health initiative. And what I thought in my mind initially when we moved is that, I was applying for pediatric positions. I would find a pediatric, NP job, in rural South Carolina, and then just kind of develop this thing as it came along. But that was not the case at all. I couldn't find anything to save my life for this pediatric nurse practitioner position, because pediatric NPs are very, very specialized, especially when you're in urban areas. You have tons of pediatric hospitals. Within rural South Carolina specifically, the nearest pediatric hospital is about 60 miles away from where I am. Right. So it's very difficult to find that kind of specialty. And it's not to say it's impossible, but it's a little bit more challenging. And more people are looking for, family NPs or other type of NPs that can get the whole lifespan, because you may not have access to everyone. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? And so I started just networking and building up this initiative and finding ways, and said, maybe I can start my own clinic or my own kind of practice, because in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania, there's a little more autonomy. Not the case in South Carolina. Very restrictive, actually, unfortunately. Probably one of the most restrictive. And even as we think about this current pandemic, and we're opening up licensures for nurses and nurse practitioners, it has been one of the more challenging areas as it applies to, releasing some of those restrictions so people can have access to care. And so I thought, I have to think innovatively for us to kind of live, but also what is my vision really? How am I going to play this out? What I thought I was going to do is kind of crumbling in front of me. What does that look like now? And I had this moment of pause, of just this revelation that the vision is not about a building that you create or a job that you hold. It's about your insight, your understanding, your perspective, and in being able to apply that to whatever it is that you want to do. And so I just started kind of re-envisioning this whole outlook of what I was doing. And I started all of a sudden being introduced to, the local hospital CEOs, any directors, clinic managers, and just was very vocal about, here's my health initiative. I want to take a partnership and collaborate to increase access to care. I want to find out how we can change the vulnerable areas of our community and find out what is it that the community really needs, so that whatever project or intervention might come from your profession or your professional outreach, that it actually matches the needs of the community. And as I started building momentum of that, and I started trying to gain visibility, whether through professional networks like LinkedIn or, Twitter and all these other kinds of things, nurses started coming out of everywhere saying, I want to do what you're doing. How are you coming up with that? Because I would start kind of chronicling my hardships, my challenges, but also just my mindset perspective shift. And nurses were like, I'm getting burnt out at the bedside. I want to implement my nursing in a telehealth way, or I want to implement some other type of, I have this business that I want to do. How do you start that? What do you do? And at the time I was really just learning trial by fire. I reached out to my local small business association. I started being invited to sit on boards to be a, a health voice for the clinical arena. And it was just through this building and this experience that I was able to share knowledge to other people. And I recognized my vision was more than just about me. It was about inspiring the vision of other nurses and how they could think outside of the box too. And hence, Visionary Nurse birthed itself. And as a result, as me kind of writing down these insights and these reflections and understanding the versatility of nursing, I ended up publishing an ebook as a way to say, you know what, here's my way of reaching out to many different nurses at as many ways as I can to say, you know what, I may not be able to give you all the information that you need, but here's a way that I can inspire your vision so that others can see that there's more to nursing than just nursing. And as we're seeing now, kind of full speed, I ended up launching myself, at my own business as a consultant and coach, but a coach and mentor for nurses to help kind of develop what their vision plan might look like, how to think about nurses in business or some other pivot point that nurses might have. And then also too, as a community health consultant to say, let me partner with these organizations so that they can also think a little bit more visionary and more strategically about what their collaboration and their partnerships might look like to ultimately influence the community. So my big lofty goal of kind of changing the landscape of healthcare ended up being twofold. Help those who are helping the community to be more strategic and more sustainable, but also help those who deliver the care to think more strategically about what does their profession set them up for in order to change the landscape of health and be truly visionary.
I love so much what you're doing. It's so inspiring. It really truly is. What would you say to a nurse right now who's listening, who's saying like, okay, I've done this all my life, I want to switch. I mean, I have a vision too. Reach you, of course, get in touch with you, but what else would you say to them at this point?
My biggest like number one tip that I always give is write it down. Write down your plan. So a lot of nurses have a lot of ideas and we are super innovative without even recognizing it, but we don't write it down. We just think this is just what I do, or what's the point of writing it down, or, what will it become later? And it's that's the first step really. And when I often do my coaching sessions, it's just write down your plan. If you could redefine what it looked like right now, what your nursing looked like, what your career looked like, what would it look like on paper? Because I think sometimes that brings it a little bit more to life. Otherwise, the ideas are just inside our head all the time and they never take that next step. And it gives you kind of a little bit more of accountability because now you have this thing that you're like, I have to do something with this, right? Nurses are amazing at documentation. So it's why not document your own journey and what you need to write down for yourself. So I think that's kind of the number one step. And then, and of course, the number two is just reaching out for that support and accountability, because once you've taken that step, you need someone to help you kind of flesh that out, because it's not super intuitive to us sometimes to, as a nurse to start a business or to, make a pivot point, because we want to just be servant leaders. We want to give what we have and give it without having to ask for anything in return. But also recognizing that, that innovative idea really is still a way of changing health and healthcare. It may be, not just helping one person, but helping many different people at any given moment. I mean, even during this pandemic, I'm seeing nurses come up with all these amazing ways to, hook up ventilators so multiple patients can access what they need. They're finding ways to help, protect themselves when they may not have the access to the equipment they need. And sometimes it doesn't always pan out the way they need to. And so I think a portion of that is finding your voice, finding that mindset, that leadership, that understanding that, even the understanding of a small thing like a patent, how can I patent this idea so that not only does it benefit my hospital right now, but it might benefit multiple other hospitals as well too. And again, because we're givers by nature, sometimes that's hard to think about how to do that, but also recognizing that it wouldn't be so much about just you, but it's about delivering that effectively to many different people. And so a lot of that is just that mindset shift of you are a leader. You are leading, whether it's that one person at the bedside, that one person in your community, or a whole business, but people need your unique understanding as a nurse. And then ultimately all the other facets that come with you as a person and all the interests that you have.
Wow. That's gorgeous. Where do you see it going, right? So for yourself into the future and for nurses in general, where do you see this happening in the next year, 2, maybe 5 years, whatever you want to do there? But what do you see changing?
Yeah. I see us in it right now. Like, you know, I think all of us nurses, when the World Health Organization declared this year as the year of the nurse and midwife, I don't think we knew what that meant. I think we all wanted to be recognized and we all wanted to be acknowledged for the work that nurses do all the time. You know, and again, because we are, you know, voted as the most genuine and the most integrity and the most honest profession for so many years in a row. Again, we don't want to put ourselves out there as if we need something back in return, but there's so much research that shows that, you know, nurses need to be thanked in order to continue to keep doing what they're doing. They need that moment of gratitude. They need to be recognized. They need their voice to be heard as the advocates that they are and as the innovators that they are. So I think we're very prime and in it. I saw this slow build when I was first kind of launching my initiative and then building this business, that there were inklings of it. You know, this was about 2 or 3 years ago now, that there was a starting point of it, but now we're like really thick in it. I mean, innovation, you can't run away from it. Everyone's talking about innovation. It's the blueprint of every campaign that exists to anything. But I think as we build, we have to have some structure with that, right? So it's like everybody wants to be innovative, but what does that mean? And how do you make that last? How do you make it sustainable? And how do you make it be able to leave a legacy as it moves forward? So I think the other piece of that is that nurses are going to need to know how to pick up the pieces after all of this is done. There might be some nurses who need a break after this. Like right now, nurses and healthcare providers are in a very tricky situation where burnout may be high, which is nerve-wracking, you know, that there might be this space where it's like, I don't know how to go back to the bedside after all of this, or how do I continue to build a healthy society now that, you know, this pandemic has passed? How do we restructure the healthcare system? And more than ever, nurses have to be willing to educate themselves to be in those spaces. I've seen media run to say, we need nurses' voices now. You know, in politics and government, we need nurses' voices to restructure this. Even on the leadership level, we need nurses' voices to rebuild hospital systems and healthcare systems, because we dare not go back to what we were doing before. We have to move forward. And so for the next 5 to 10 years, our new trend is going to be, how do we not continue to patch up what has happened, but how do we rebuild and restructure? Because literally things are kind of crumbling in the way of how our systems have worked and how we've interfaced with what healthcare is. And nurses have to educate themselves now as much as possible. Those nurses who may not be on the front line, who may be waiting, or who may be out of a job, or who may be in primary care but can't really do anything right now, educate yourself on leadership, on management, on policy, on health advocacy, and how do you put your voice forward. Be willing to, you know, within safe reason, you know, craft your script for a media outlet. If you need to know how to voice your opinion and the acceptable way to do that, find those outlets to do that. And then just find that accountability so that, you know, we also don't default as a collective nursing body to just say, well, this is just how it is, you know, in small and big ways. Like I've even done, you know, kind of small things. You know, my kids are young. We kind of chatted about that before. They love this show, Baby First TV, right? And they always show these professionals on this one little, you know, cartoon skit. And I actually wrote to them and said, hey, when are you guys going to share and feature nurses? You know, you talk about all these other professions, you know, when are you going to feature nurses? Like, this is the year of the nurse and midwife. I don't know if they're going to do it or not, but it's like things like this, like, let it be visible so that people can understand why they trust nurses so much, but also to the voice that nurses can bring to really, truly, you know, changing the landscape of health. So I think now is the time where we're going to have to pick up not only the internal pieces of nurses in the sense of, you know, nurses supporting nurses, whether in coaching or in mentorship or in dealing with burnout or in trauma care and all these other things that come with it, you know, within the right certifications, but also too, how can I get my foot in the door where everything is wide open to say, you know what, I'm a nurse and an advocate and I can speak to this policy. I'm a nurse and I like to lead my team of, you know, of nurses as a nurse manager. How can I get into this hospital setting to restructure hospital systems in general? Or I'm a nurse and I have this idea, this sketch of this invention. How do I, you know, figure out a patent? How do I make that work, you know?
Oh my gosh, I love it. What is your role? What do you see as your role personally in this whole thing?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about
So my big vision for myself has always been kind of that nurse to the nurse, in the sense of the motivator, the empower, and the vision builder. So being a voice and a spokesperson for nurses to understand that they can be leaders. So I guess embodying that branding of that visionary nurse, to say opportunities to speak on a broad level to other nurses about leadership, about being able to be innovative, being able to encourage and empower nurses to take that shift, that pivot, and being able to hold nurses accountable to saying, you know what, my vision is much bigger than just me. It's not about me accomplishing a thing. It's also about inspiring your vision too. And so as I inspire your vision, then you ultimately also change, your sphere of influence that I may never reach. So I see my role as being that inspiring voice to say, nurses, it's okay to take care of yourself. Nurses, it's okay to figure out how to pivot if you need to for your sustainability. Nurses, there's many different facets to you in terms of what nursing looks like. It looks more, it looks like the clinical classic setting, but it also looks like the education setting, the business setting, the policy setting, the sitting on the board setting, and being available to figure out how to find that and navigate that.
Beautiful. I love that. So anybody who's listening right now, we'd love to hear down below. If make a comment, right?
Yeah.
Say yes if you're ready to be a visionary nurse and make a, like you said it so beautifully. Let's put it down below. Go to thevisionarynurse.com, I would say, and get that ebook, right? It's free, available for us, and it's beautiful. So get that ebook as well. But I think I want to end kind of with this notion about, if you have one or two nurses who you would speak to now directly, right? Just one-on-one, and you could speak only, I don't know, a few sentences. That's how I kind of want to wrap it up. What is it that you want to say? And before we do that, I just want to thank you for this interview. You are an amazing visionary nurse. You're yourself.
Thank you.
Everything that you've done and what you're doing, and we're so needed of nurses like you right now. And I think we need to stand up as a collective. You're right, to be nurses with voices. I love that. So I'm going to have to give the last word to you. What would you say to the nurses who are out there right now?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, don't let fear stop you. There are many, many moments that I questioned, I doubted, and I said, this is crazy. Like, no one's asked me to start a business. No one asked me to speak to hospital administrators about, my understanding of nursing and how that affects the community. And we can literally psych ourselves out. And so don't let fear stop you from being visionary. And again, just taking that one step, whether it's writing your plan down or, again, within reason of what you can do, having that conversation, maybe approaching that one person that might be able to help you leverage just a little bit more. Just try to take that one step, because again, as nurses, we try to have everything figured out, and it's difficult. Just take that one step, and sometimes doubt may come, but just kind of lean into that a little bit and then figure out, how do I pivot from there? Because you're innovative already as a nurse. So you can be innovative in many different other areas too. The second thing I say, continue to educate yourself. So sometimes when you're in the thick of it, things can feel stalled, or you feel like you don't have enough information. And the last thing any nurse, I think, wants to be is incompetent in what they're doing. They don't want to not have all the answers and have it figured out. And even if you don't have all the answers, continue to educate yourself. I don't have an MBA, but I have read any and every business book that I can. I even, friends of mine who are nurses who know where I'm at send me business books all the time. And so it's educating. I get connected with, the resources that are out there in the Small Business Development Center, in SBA in general, and finding ways to understand, what grants are out there for nurses, what programs are out there in order for you to build in your leadership skill if you don't have it. I mean, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has grants. There's the national NAM, the National Association of Medicine, I think that's the acronym that it is, or the National Academy of Medicine. They have grants out there for healthcare providers who want to do innovative things. There are tons of opportunities out there. American Nurses Association did a collaborative innovation grant through BD, through Becton Dickinson. So there's a lot of things that are out there that sometimes we don't even open our mind to, because we are just like, this is beyond me. But research those things and find out, and find ways to continue to build, even if you're not ready yet, to know what's out there, so that when the time does come, that you are prepared to launch whatever it is. And then, from there, the sky's the limit, because literally people will say, you know what, I do think that that's an innovative idea, and I do want to take that to the next level. And it's all just about that timing. So no fear, no doubt, you know, write that vision down and educate yourself for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Antoinette. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.